Eric Francis Coppolino, it's so lovely to see you here. I am really delighted to catch up with you after many, many years of somehow being lost in the dross of the internet. And YouTube proposed you a few weeks ago, and I had this wonderful recollection of your smooth, velvety smooth voice that I used to listen to many, many years ago. And I have recently caught back up with what you're doing, and so I wanted to introduce you to my followers and to let them know what a real New York astrologer looks like, and to maybe have another glimpse at what astrology is these days as well, what it's becoming and what it is these days.
Hmm.
So, can you just give us a nutshell bio of who you are, what you've been doing? It's been a couple of decades of doing astrology, so let us know a little bit more about you.
Well, first, thank you. I'm thrilled YouTube actually recommended me because I was pretty sure that I had like a -10 on the rating on the algorithm for being such a naughty boy. Uh,
I
so,
think perhaps I'm just marginal enough that that's why.
right.
When you're also on the margins, you get recommended people who are pretty marginal. So
I guess
it
so.
works.
We centaurs on the edge can stay in contact. So I came to astrology through news reporting, several different ways. I really did not understand what astrology was. Like most people, didn't really have a place in my life. I knew I was Pisces. That's a little fish. My brother was Leo the lion. That made sense, but that's just like the childhood version. And the funniest thing about my astrology journey is that on the day that I began university, I think that was September 1st, 1981, a Tuesday. I was 17 years old, and I spent the weekend in the dorms on the campus out in the suburbs, and took the Bluebird bus into the city campus, and got off the bus. I was about 10 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes late for my first class ever in university, ever, Introduction to Philosophy, taught by Professor Paul Kurtz. And it turns out that Paul Kurtz was one of the most famous people in 20th century astrology, because he led the campaign in the Humanist magazine, of which he was the editor, to completely discredit astrology. And he led the 186
Oh,
scientists, including the 11 Nobel laureates, blah, blah, blah. He was, when I walked into my first class at university, into the classroom of this very nice professor, that was Professor Kurtz. And we became friends. He liked me. I was an engaged student. I would ask questions in class, and who, what person like me doesn't like philosophy? Just pick any topic, like randomly out of a lotto machine, and I'm there. So I took his philosophy of the paranormal class, which I was a little more I was into, like the paranormal. That seemed like an interesting topic. So that was kind of the first clue that I was going to, in retrospect, do something in astrology that I think ultimately made a difference. And then I didn't hear about astrology again till my anthropology professor that semester said, maybe we were walking after class, and he said, all astrologers go insane.
okay, that's comforting.
David Banks, very smart guy. I was in touch with him. I often stay in touch with my professors. I was in touch with him till he may still be alive. Maybe 10 years ago, I thanked him. And then the really funny thing happened was, I had been an editor and investigative reporter even in university, and then I moved to a new age community in 80 86, Miracle Manor, to do the Course in Miracles, which is still a significant part of my life. Although I don't really
Yeah, a brilliant
thump
book.
it.
Yeah.
I don't thump it too much, but not really. It as a book, it's a very good thumping book. I mean, it's 1,000 pages, and it makes a nice, satisfying thump on the pulpit. But I landed in the newspaper office of Flo Higgins, part of the Recorder Publishing Group, and I wanted to be a journalist, and so I got my first job as a journalist, and I was hired by Flo Higgins, who owned an astrology-centered bookstore in New Jersey. And again, I hadn't the least concept of what an astrologer actually was. But I'm sitting, she hires me, and I play the New Age card because I was in a New Age community and she was a New Age person. And I let the book, The Starseed Transmissions, fall out of my bag during the interview. The only time I've ever done something like that. And it was the 80s. And she hired me. And um, I was sitting at my desk writing articles in this little weird little apricot computer, maybe somebody remembers, staring at an astrology calendar. The astrology calendar was waiting for me, hanging over my desk. I was 22 or 23 years old. And so my first introduction to technical astrology was staring at this astrology calendar, wondering what the heck it was. And meanwhile, Flo Higgins, who had something of a heavy foot in an office that seemed like it was about to collapse, like it was one of those buildings that really needed the floor ripped up and floor joists put back down, was always thumping around the office giving warnings. Mercury's about to be retrograde.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
Let me get my ruler. Saturn square the sun. That's how she would say it. Saturn square the sun. Work harder. It was one of those kinds of places. And we were churning out 80 inches of copy a week. And we all, at least, yeah, the writers seemed to love it. We were paid nothing. And we were, working till 11 o'clock at night. But we were in a newspaper, writing real newspaper articles. And through that, the 11 months I worked under Flo's tutelage, I was introduced to basic fundamental principles of astrology, aided and abetted by her Saturnian. She was one of those real Saturn women, real with a mean mouth, but she was all love, right? But she was like this old Irish lady who never seemed to crack a grin. But underneath that crust was a genuine love of humanity and respect for what she was doing. But she had been there for 27 years and it was getting old. And I often
Saturn cycle.
Yes, there's one progressed moon cycle. And I often appear places just before the time of transition. So I'm a bit of a harbinger of transition when I arrive, but I was also the first person competent enough to run the newspaper while she took a vacation. So she took her first vacation while I was there because I had already edited several different publications. Even though I was only 23 years old, I knew what it meant to put the publication to press on time, in good condition, and she could go away for a week. And she did. Big news broke. I did a great job covering it. And she retired soon after. So that was, as Michael Luton said, I fell through the ceiling of astrology. It's a very accurate description. But then never thought I'd be an astrologer. And I think what's so interesting is that through subsequent, I rediscover astrology in the New York Post, a newspaper, right? We know what that is, right? Through the horoscope, Patrick Walker, estimated to have had 1 billion readers. But I was paying very close attention to what he was saying. And after about a year and a half or so of this, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know how he did this. And there's a trick to everything. And in Patrick's case, it was being a really good writer and a really good astrologer and being earnest, completely sincere. And so I started to deconstruct the horoscope using an ephemeris. I guess I've done this before. And a year later, I started a horoscope column, and that's the column that I still write. And soon after that, I began
What year was that?
95, the 30th,
Right.
the 29th anniversary. I've got the first horoscope chart hanging on my wall here underneath like the 10 layers of other things taped to the wall. And I haven't stopped. That's run continuously now for 29 years. It's the mainstay. It's why people give me money. There's not a lot of good horoscopes left anymore. Though Patrick's successor, Sally Brompton, I think is A plus mundane astrologer. She doesn't have the tactile quality that Patrick had. The Pisces moon, and it's very sweet. Sally's a little more. She reminds me of someone who's shooting pool. It's like 1 a.m. and she's got a couple of drinks on, and she just takes those shots and she throws her whole body into it, and bam, she slams two balls into the pockets at the same time. That's what I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if she played pool. There's not a lot of good horoscopes left who are doing a classic 12 sign horoscope, where you come to depend upon the voice and the presence of the astrologer for something other than advice, right? Looking for so Patrick always had a viewpoint that I couldn't see. He was always coming from some other angle, like he was up there looking down slightly on the situation. He could see who the people were, and he was truly my way shower in that, as I think it was Fritz Perls who said, that learning is discovering that something is possible.
That's
and
beautiful.
so it was a real learning experience for me, because he demonstrated that you can do something with astrology. What it confounded me was, like, looking at these vastly complicated charts that are all different, and what is all this stuff, and what is all this stuff, like, how could this possibly matter? And then they're all relating to each other, and that always turned me off. Like, why? Like, why? And then I'm reading Patrick, and he's saying things that he absolutely shouldn't know.
Right. Yeah. Out of
About
thin air.
big things happening in my life. And I just caught on. I mean, he was dying of, it was then said to be AIDS. I believe he was killed by AZT. He was right in that era where everyone, particularly famous people, were being murdered with AZT. So he's listed as salmonella. He is said to have had AIDS. It's not on his Wikipedia page or official bio. But I think that he was one of the victims of AZT poisoning, and I miss him dearly every day. And I think about him, and he is still kind of holding a beacon in a way that something is possible. So I wrote the horoscope for a while, and I set aside all my news reporting, which was pretty high level. I was covering GE and Monsanto and Westinghouse and the EPA and the New York State Department of Health, and covering global mass poisoning incidents and toxic torts litigation. So I was no kind of a dilettante, in astrology, in investigative reporting. I was writing the kind of articles that the lawyers had to approve before they went out, and I never had a lawyer send one back. Because I was taught by law-trained people how to be an investigative reporter. And but I was so exhausted from that I had to take a break. And the break was studying astrology one winter of 94 and 95, working for the Jackie Sloan Psychic Circle, making my money by answering psychic hotline calls all night.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day, 1-900 numbers. I got this job, and I thought, this is terrible. $4 a minute. Think about that. In 1995, $4 a minute. It's like $10 a minute today, and mostly poor people calling.
Yeah.
And I objected to it.
Yeah.
I got hired. And then I objected to it because of the price. And then it occurred to me, well, they're going to either get me or they're going to get somebody else. And I had, from Flo Higgins, I bought a deck of tarot cards, right? And I had my chart, but I mainly had tarot cards and runes. So I knew that divination was real. And I was very, very well practiced in tarot cards. And so I read tarot cards all night. And when I decided to log in, I called the company and introduced myself. And I got this guy, Virgil Curry, the leader of another Pisces. And we loved each other from the first minute. It was one of those things that just happens in life. And he's like, look, you're good at this. If you'll work the night shift, I'll bump you to priority 1. So you'll get a lot of calls. I'm like, Great. So I did that, and then I talked to Dave Rell at the Astrology Center of Southern California, who was lonely in his books, lived in his bookstore, and wanted company. And I would call his 800 number every night, and he would talk to me for an hour, night after night, recommend the right books to read, tell me all of this stuff that I should not have known as a first year astrologer, right? When someone is, willing to tell you everything, you should listen. And I listened to him, and I fell in love with Dave Rell as well. And finally he graduated me. He said, "Look, you have everything you need. Hang up your shingle, charge $75 an hour. You're now an astrologer." And along the way, I have a lot of Chiron in my chart, so I have a thing with mentorship. I understand the concept of mentorship. All learning that happens through mentorship, really, and self-study, which are related. And I took a journalistic approach and started calling people up and asking them about astrology and what they did and what they wrote, and got this very concentrated kind of tutelage for the first few years. And I figured out that if you call up an astrologer, usually, and you have good questions, and they'll talk to you. They don't charge. And I'm the same way. I put my phone number out for anyone to see. Anybody who calls me up, I'll talk to them. If they're smart and respectful and they seem honest, I'm right there. And this worked for me. And I did this for years when people still had phone numbers, and then they had email addresses, were much easier to reach in the early days of the internet. So I get this super concentrated kind of bringing me up to speed in astrology. And then Flight 800 fell into the Long Island Sound. 747 with students heading to France, just falls out of the sky into the Long Island Sound. And I had a teacher.
Remind us what year that was.
That was probably 96.
Okay.
And I had a local teacher named Dave Harner, and I called him up. We did the chart together, and he pulls the chart up on his computer, and he says, "Neptune was rising. The Navy did it, and we'll never know the truth." I'm telling you, he looked at the chart for at most 10 seconds. And those were the first words out of his mouth. And we now know that the Coast Guard shot the plane down using a heat-seeking missile accidentally. Everyone saw the missile in East Mauritius, Long Island. They were talking about it in the bars. There's an FBI witness statement in there. There's an FBI interview available saying the same thing.
Wow.
And it was attributed to some bullshit cause back when Boeings were good airplanes. So that got me into news astrology. Now, of course, I went the initial route of like reading for clients. The concept of the horoscope was they'll like the column, they'll come in and be my client. And then through that, I got into doing a lot of research into Chiron. So I had a way of getting right to the source. I got right to Barbara Hanklau right away, and then Melanie Reinhardt. And I've had some discussions with Zane Stein and Doc Chiron, Dale O'Brien out in Oregon. So my career took two simultaneous tracks: the research astrology and natal astrology work as kind of one track, and then the research astrology with the news astrology as another track. And this may be confusing to people, like how can I do this? But I'm just the same person basically doing the same thing, only framing it differently. And then when investigations came up, I had the tool of astrology, and there have been many that I've done without. I worked on COVID for years, and I had very little to say about the astrology publicly, though I followed it privately. I didn't want to intrude on a scientific audience with astrology, so I kept it in the background. But of course, the astrology is quite pronounced.
Absolutely.
Quite
I do the
incredible.
same, but for reasons of cowardice, basically, because I just can't I whenever I say certain words or certain things, the whole, already already you just get marginalized for next to nothing. So yeah, that one had to be left for private conversations, but it's very clear the astrology is crystal clear in
But I
terms
never
of
hid that I was an astrologer. I made sure I put that right in everybody's face.
right. Yeah.
So because I don't want to create a situation where like I'm found out to be an astrologer, and sometimes people pretend to find out that I'm an astrologer.
Yeah, like you're
It's
not
like,
all over the
oh,
internet.
oh
Yeah.
wow, Eric Clapton plays guitar. Like this
Yes. Yeah,
late
yeah,
breaking
yeah.
news. Like, well, whoever thought that could be possible?
Yeah.
So, but I know how to bring it into the conversation and when to bring it in and when to leave it
Mm.
out. And I'm never afraid to leave it out, and I bring it in whenever I think it's appropriate. That, in a nutshell, sums up that part of my public work. I do I keep myself entertained with other forms of art, music, and photography, and sometimes
Mm-mm.
painting when I've got enough room.
Mm.
But
I
that's
remember
my
coming into your astrology in, I think it was March 2011 when Neptune moved into Pisces.
2011 was
I
a
was
big
I was
year.
listening.
Yeah.
That was the tsunami. That was the nuclear meltdown,
Yes, that was a lot of things
Fukushima.
happened. 2011 was
Yeah.
Fukushima. It was Arab
But it was
Spring.
exactly as Neptune moved into Pisces, that was the Fukushima
I think
incident.
Uranus. I think you mean Uranus.
Oh, was it Uranus?
No.
I thought it coincided with Neptune in Pisces. Okay, so maybe I got it wrong, but I remember your take on that, and that was the one thing that actually made me realize how much we can do with astrology.
Yep.
In terms of global mundane astrology, I was always amazed by that. That's why I listened to you so avidly in the
Hmm.
early days. I thought, wow, nobody's doing this.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what? So that
Well,
was Uranus. Okay.
there's not. I need to verify that. It was a while ago. And I can
Mm,
check. The thing is that I think that a lot of astrologers try to do mundane astrology,
mm,
but it really helps if you're a reporter. If you really,
yes.
not if you call yourself one. Now today, everyone calls themselves a journalist. But if you really know how to have the points of attribution that you need to know
Mhm.
what is happening in the world,
Yeah.
and so I happen to have all the equipment needed for that, and
Hmm.
a reporting team. I always have a little retinue of people interested in doing the work around me, and so I'm able to work more quickly
Mm.
than most people are able to work. Plus, I'm used to deadline. I mean, just today I woke up and I click on the New York Times 10 times a day, and there was actually something different on the front page this morning that didn't involve Trump or Ukraine, and that was that a ship hit a bridge in Baltimore, and the freaking bridge fell down.
Yeah, that's wild.
That is really astounding that happened, and I can go grab that chart out of the scanner if you
Yeah, do
like.
go get it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so hold on a
this is
second.
for me, it's an omen coming from this eclipse. Yeah. Yeah, I do feel this bridge collapse is an omen for this eclipse cycle because it happened on the day of the eclipse.
And
And
24 hours
in
later,
yeah, but for me, I keep the phase of the moon in mind around eclipses and lunations because
sure.
the moon is full for 3 days
Oh, it was at
practically.
full
So
phase, and
yeah, yeah,
right away. I mean, the moon is the most elevated thing in the chart,
right,
and it's right on its own south node.
right,
So this
yeah,
eclipse is not over when this happens, and
yeah,
it's about to make an opposition to Chiron right there.
yeah.
But I think that the among the things,
Opposition to Mercury as well soon enough because within an hour or so because that's transport as well.
yep. So
Uh,
I use very very tight orbs though,
okay.
because I use so many
You
planets. I
don't go
have
to the
to.
next planet that it's aspected. I
Sure. I
work
mean,
with
that's in
yeah.
there. That's in there.
Mm,
But there's something more. I mean, it's that's in the story, right? Anything the
mm,
moon does before it leaves the sign counts. So
yeah,
I haven't
yeah.
done that step by step breakdown. I didn't have
Hmm.
time to look at all the previous aspects and then all the subsequent aspects.
Yeah.
But we definitely see the eclipse involved because the moon is conjunct the node, and then I think it's remarkable that Mercury is conjunct Eris,
Yes.
which it
Yeah,
will be for the solar eclipse.
as well. Yeah.
So as well.
But
So
it'll be a retrograde Mercury then,
the whole thing, we're now in a long stage of Mercury lingering around
the shadow pole.
Eris.
Yes.
It's a
Yeah.
long conjunction because of the slowness of Mercury.
Yeah.
And this talks about chaos and the breakdown of society and the breakdown of communication. And there is some distracting factor on board that vessel. It's going to be really interesting to see what information comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. My
Um,
first inclination was that they were drunk or on drugs or some kind of, it was, there, you can't just randomly
Run into a bridge pier.
run into a bridge. I mean, come on. It's, and also the other sad thing, that the second thing I thought was that they had some kind of brain hemorrhage or some kind of heart
Yeah, but there's
attack,
a lot of people watching.
sudden death
There should be
experience.
several people at the helm on the bridge. There should
Yeah.
be several people on the way out to sea standing watch. Look, it's possible there was some kind of a radar error that with retrograde
Okay.
Mercury conjunct Eris, I didn't say that in the thing, I'll add it to the comments. There is a
Oh, it's
possibility of a technological error or communication
right. It's not
breakdown. They
retrograde
were
for
off by
5 days.
1 degree
Yeah.
in the
It's in the shadow,
navigation.
but it's not retrograde yet. It's retrograde on the first.
I get it, but I take a particularly wide orb on the retrograde, and we're still
Okay.
in slow, powerful. It's slow. Mercury's slow, so
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
be more influential because it's slow,
Right.
and it's conjunct Eris, and so the possibility for miscommunication or a technology failure exists, but still, there's only one bridge on the way out.
Yeah.
There's not
I
like
mean,
20. It's not like New York. Even New York Harbor, there's not a lot of bridges. But if you're coming in from the Long Island Sound to New York Harbor, which is not that common, because you can come in directly from the Atlantic. You go under 20 bridges or 10 bridges or something. You got a bridge every 5 minutes. That's not the case with Baltimore. There's just one bridge.
right. And it's lit up.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, it's
So it's
pretty hard to
astounding. So
miss.
I thought this is a perfect case study for astrology, because it's one of those things that just should not have happened. So now it will be interesting to see what that was about. So I find this to be interesting. Um, I'm not sure the use of it, except that there is so much discussion of the news in the world right now. There's so much analysis of the news, and so little of it means anything. And that to bring in an astrology angle, at least as a new angle, it's a different angle than we're getting, and it's
Yeah.
it's interesting. The problem that a lot of the mundane astrologers today are making is they say the chart looks like it's a radical chart. It fits the event. It was planned. They go right to it
Right.
was planned. Oh,
Yeah.
they used astrology and planned the event. Well, no, you don't understand astrology if you think that's what it's about. The point is the
Everybody has an
astrology
astrologer nowadays. What?
it reveals something behind the scenes other than necessarily planning. If there's planning, you should be able to see that.
Yeah.
That's a
Yes.
facet
It'll
of
be
the
revealed by the chart.
yeah, there
Exactly.
should be something in there that talks about
Yeah.
planning. And the only thing that makes me wonder, besides the fact that they were probably having a party,
Yeah.
is that Vesta appears in the 29th degree of
I
Gemini.
was going to ask you about that because you and Michael Luton introduced me to the Kuiper Belt objects and all these incredible microplanets and asteroids and so on. And because of that, I know that you will have some kind of extraordinary awareness of what they're doing. I don't use most of them. I
Well,
use
okay, so first
cartography.
of all, the degree is activated, and I've seen the
Okay.
degree show up in a series of events, including it was the moon's position on 9/11.
Oh,
It was
wow.
active in
Interesting.
the tsunami chart,
Right.
the Banda Aceh tsunami. That you can
Is there a fixed star at that point? What's
there
the
is
degree of
it
the
is
moon? Oh,
Betelgeuse.
really? Right, yeah.
So there's a fixed star there,
Mm-mm.
um, and it stopped showing up in these event charts. That objects in 29 Gemini worked for a while, and I think
Mm.
even through Fukushima, I think Atlantis was conjunct in that degree.
Right.
Then it stopped going away, and the false flags became harder to spot.
Okay.
And I hadn't ruled Banda Aceh a false flag, but I think it may have been caused by drilling.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Okay.
they can make an earthquake with drilling,
Yeah.
a small one. But with earthquakes, you can have a knock effect. One can make another, can make another, can make another.
Mm.
Anyway, that makes me that puts us on notice. And sometimes it turns out that these 1% chances, there's like I leave it down at an arbitrary 1%.
Hmm.
Sometimes that 1%.
Is everything.
It's
It's
everything.
everything. Yeah. I wonder if these false flag events are not showing up so much anymore because
Everything's
they're
false
so
flag.
frequent. Well, I mean, without being, cynical about it, there is just so much that's going on that is somehow like driven from behind the scenes. And I'm not being uh, thoroughly, entirely conspiratorial when I say that. It's just that this is how our modern world is functioning
Yeah.
now. It's not out, nothing is really obvious. Maybe it never was, but we're realizing that nothing is
Well, it
really obvious.
starts to seem like everything's orchestrated.
Mm.
Um, I, I have to, the little kid in me has to really stretch his mind. And that's the most flexible part of me is the little kid. Uh, to think that somebody would just intentionally drive a cargo ship into a bridge to knock down the
Yeah,
bridge. But it's very debilitating. I mean, Baltimore is a major port. There's no other
right.
bridge that does that. It's going to disrupt trade. It's going to take 10 years to rebuild this bridge.
Yeah, at a time that the US doesn't invest in infrastructure as
No,
well. So
right.
it's devastating.
Yep.
Yeah,
We'll
because,
we'll
yeah,
see.
there's a number of,
I wanted to get my reading of the chart into the record before there were other astrologers on it and before there was an investigation,
right.
just as a test case to see.
Yeah. What does the astrology tell us?
Yep.
Yeah.
What is it? What is?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's subjective, but
Mm-mm. So are the asteroids speaking louder than the planets in this one or not
I don't think.
specifically?
I mean, well, there's look. Eris is very prominent.
Yeah.
That's not an asteroid. Chiron's very prominent. That's not an asteroid. It's a minor planet. Nessus is very prominent. This is going to talk about the history of the captain. Before we start blaming men, it looks like there was female presence.
So it was an
Juno,
orgy.
why in Boston Harbor? Why not get into international waters and tell the computer to run to sail the boat, and then have your orgy, or have the orgy right on the bridge, where you can quickly get to the steering wheel if you need it. Or maybe there's a gay helmsman who doesn't want to be in the heterosexual orgy. So you ew, not my thing. I'll drive the ship. You guys have a good time.
Oh my God.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait a few days to find out what anybody's going to know.
and we'll see if even this investigation doesn't take a year or two. I mean,
Right.
how long did it take for the Valdez to come out? I mean, Hazelwood was drunk. The captain was drunk
Yeah.
on the Exxon Valdez,
But
and then
that was also probably about the petroleum industry trying to mask that as well. I think the petroleum industry itself was doing all it could to prevent any kind of investigation around that for liability reasons. So
yeah, and tankers with one layer of metal, and
yeah, yeah.
shipping
My
has
God,
a
all these stories that are just coming back to my memory now. I hadn't thought about the Exxon Valdez for so long, and yeah, these were major things. So this is a
they
big
were,
deal.
but the news cycle is so condensed now, and
Mm.
then we're distracted by Ukraine on the cover of the Times
Yeah,
every day.
yeah, yeah.
Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel. It's the same thing over and over again, and the whole world is marching on. There's things happening, uh, in every place, in every
Of course, yeah,
facet
yeah,
of
yeah,
life. So
yeah, right. So yeah, I want to dig into your history and your familiarity with astrology and how it's grown over the last few decades. I was initially a consumer of astrology for a very long time, and it was only in 2012 that I actually started as an astrologer.
mhm.
And so I wasn't really observing it from very close up most of that time. But since 20, let's say for the last 12 years, it's been a very intense kind of observation and participation in the whole story of the growth of astrology, which is, it's just gone crazy basically since that, I think really since that 2012 era. And
Hmm.
I don't know if 2012 was the catalyst for that, or if it was a combination of social media conjoining with the frenzy around 2012. But what are your thoughts on that? How did this? How did we get here? How did we get to this place where everybody assumes that everybody has an astrologer?
I was not aware of that. And a lot of what I see on the internet is laughable.
Hmm.
It's all personality driven,
Yeah,
image driven, most of it, not all of it. And I don't. There's very few astrologers. Let's put it this way: I frequent a lot of websites, and I'm constantly scanning the internet. It never occurs to me to go to an astrology website to
mm-hmm.
look for any thing that I might not already know. But I do read
Mm-hmm.
Sally Brompton every day.
Mm-hmm.
I never miss Sally. I screenshot the column, and I learn something from from what she says. But she's a print era person, and so
Right, yeah,
we can't really understand what's happened to astrology without understanding the transition from print to digital.
right.
And astrology is a scribal art. Astrology is supposed to take a long time, and it's supposed to happen at night with the lamp on, and you have to read a lot of books, and you have to forget to brush your teeth for 3 days, and it's a very geeky thing. And what has happened under digital influence is it's been electrified. Astrology was never that big in radio and television. It was, I mean, there were a couple of, there's that guy in England who looks like Liberace, and every now and then an astrologer gets onto TV, and they were like, oh, maybe in Nevada City, California, there was an astrology radio show, or
Right. Do you
Berkeley, or
remember Omar Khayyam?
well, yeah, vaguely
Wasn't he?
horoscope
I think
writer,
he was
right?
American. Yeah, but wasn't he also a TV personality? I seem to remember him on talk show. He would come on talk shows and things like
Sure, but
that.
it's still a specialty item, right? It's not like
Yeah,
sports.
yeah.
It's
No,
not
it
like
was him.
election commentary or the stock market or
Oh
anything.
no, 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 for sure
So it
not.
was
Yeah,
always marginalized from
yeah,
broadcast media in the
yeah.
States, not in India, a little less
Oh no,
so in
that's a
England,
different story.
but in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
States, and it only finds its way into electrical circulation on the internet.
Hmm.
And astrology is everything but an electrical art. It's
What do
very
you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit?
sure. I mean, music lends itself well to electricity,
Hmm.
amplification, put it on the phonograph, unless you have one of those old Thomas Edison ones where you've got to crank it along,
Right.
um, which I don't have one of those. It's one of the only things I don't have. Um,
A
and so
vitriol.
a
Oh,
Victrola, yes,
vitriol. Okay,
a
yeah.
Victrola. And so astrology is scribal. Astrology is about ancient texts. It's about looking at the stars at night in the dark. It's about the individual case. We can look at the bridge chart and make comparisons to other bridge collapses. There are not that many, but
Mm.
I'm going to find a few. Um, so it's a scribal, very private, individual case thing that does not lend itself well to being generalized, in a
Hmm.
way. I mean, generally when you put astrology on TV, it always seems stupid.
Yes. Yeah, it gets too
The
watered down. Absolutely.
Kate Middleton, I saw the famous astrologer who allegedly had her time. She's the 7 p.m. She's the source. I forget her name. And she was commenting on the birth of one of the royal children. Oh, he's a Cancerian. He's very compassionate. Like, go to hell. Thanks for the birth time. Shove it up your nose.
I think that birth time works really well, by the way,
It
the 7
does.
p.m.
I
Yeah,
agree. It works fine. But I'm saying when you put her commentary about the birth of the
yeah, yeah,
first
yeah,
royal child on TV, she
yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like an idiot.
Of course, yeah,
And
yeah.
nobody fucking cares. Right? So this is the problem, and that's also on the internet, right? We only found out about that because nobody cares what's on TV4 in England, right? Or BBC One or whatever the hell it is. So astrology is scribal. It's very important to understand what that means. That's based in the reading of and writing of letters and the printing of letters, mostly the writing of letters. But let's be generous and call the print era scribal because scribal types thrived. People who like to read and write a lot. That's what astrology calls for. It's very quiet and introspective. And
Mm,
digital media rips people out of their center. All electrical media takes people out of their center and makes them part of an artificial tribe,
mm.
and it takes away everything that is personal, private, introspective, and unique about each case of astrology. And so I do not think that digital is going to be good for astrology. And I think it's in a we are in a phase of decline with astrology that is marked by a kind of bizarre mass popularity, and the rise of astrology that can be written by robot,
Yeah, yeah,
because who cares? If it's right or wrong. The thing with astrology is that it is so arcane that anybody claiming to be an astrologer can whip around one of these charts and say absolutely anything. And since astrologers tend to be so poorly spoken anyway,
That's not been my experience, I have to say. I've
well, not
I've
at
got
conferences. No, not at
no,
not
no.
the authors who work and have editors and who take
Right,
25
right. Yeah.
years,
You're talking about the YouTube version now.
the YouTube version
Yeah.
and the chatter version. And I'm
Hmm.
not I'm not saying that young astrologers don't know something. If you focus a young astrologer, they can come up with the thing that opens up the whole chart because there's something good about being new at things, but there's something
Yeah.
very bad about the concept of the internet where everyone's an instant expert. And the
Yes. Yeah.
problem with astrology is I think it takes 10 years to get on your feet as an
Hmm.
astrologer and a lot of preparation in other fields. And
I
the
agree.
internet favors the perception of instant expertise.
Yeah.
Ah,
And as you mentioned, the media savvy as well. The presentation and the yeah, everything. Yeah.
well, if you happen to not
I
know very
think the
much,
same thing that happened with us with yoga, because I was a yoga teacher for 25 years and I started practicing yoga in 1985. And I saw this evolution of yoga. And I think again, because of the internet. And then I also practice Ayurveda and I saw the same evolution with Ayurveda,
yep,
where it all got flattened out
yep,
and dumbed
flattened out.
down, basically. And the same thing is happening with astrology. And I think that is because of this YouTube phenomenon. And then, of course, TikTok and everything else, where everything is exciting and urgent and powerful and super. And it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah,
It's not.
right,
It's
right.
just not. So let's just not. Please call everything exciting and
Mhm.
powerful, because it just again it disqualifies them. I mean, for me anyway, it's disqualifying to use that kind of vocabulary to
Yeah.
constantly talk about the most mundane passage of a moon or something. This whole thing about a supermoon is driving me nuts,
Well, and
basically.
blood moon. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to get violent.
I can't.
Blood moon. I
Yes.
mean, have any of these people ever actually seen blood? Blood is not like pale rust color. Blood is like rich, solid red, like that object in the corner of my screen. Like even
Yeah,
that's very light and fluffy
yeah,
for
that's pomegranate moon there.
yeah,
Yeah.
pomegranate moon.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, it's. I find it's really hard to not sound like a cranky old lady, but it is really something that gets to me. Where and the thing I find that's a phenomenon in tandem to this is that tarot card readers explode. It just absolutely explode online. And you have tarot channels that are 2, 3 years old that have 150 or 200,000 followers.
Yeah.
And you just think, wow, like what's going on here? People, what is this social phenomenon? That's for me the thing that I'm
Okay,
curious
so
about.
I there's another part to this theory that the internet is creating psychic chaos,
Mm,
and people are looking for answers, and they're not looking for studied difficult answers. They're looking for easy answers, and tarot pretends to do that.
mm.
And it also is more obviously random. You know, the chart looks very scientific, and
Mm.
you're just flipping out tarot cards, and it seems like, wow, this is kind of chaotic and random, and it matches. And I've watched some of these channels, and I try to construct a narrative out of what they're saying, and I have a hard
Mm.
time doing it usually.
Yeah.
And yet, I think that all of this digital chaos is perfect for actual astrology, because astrology is one of the few things that has the number of variables and the depth and the interplay between the variables to be able to actually make a cohesive picture of the world that we live in, if it's done slowly, thoughtfully, and carefully.
And for the individual mostly, if we're working towards personal growth, we can abstract from all of this this chaos and try and bring that back to what am I going to do about this,
Mm-hmm.
rather than waiting to be told what to do about this. It's a big part of this for me, this challenge of being on YouTube
Yep.
is I resisted going on YouTube for a long time, partly because I'm very shy and I don't actually want to be on YouTube. But the other part is that I just couldn't, I was like, how can I translate what legitimately is an astrology reading and make that viable for all of these people without making it extremely watered down? It's really hard.
Yep. And I think the individual case is always interesting. I mean, like, I haven't done an experiment in doing, like, to find a subject from the audience and do their Chiron transits with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, right from my second reading, I used to be buddies with Dave Wilcock. I don't know, he's a very famous guy who kind of lost a sense of humor.
Okay.
He's big on the alien and the ancient alien and all that. But we were friends before he was famous, and
Okay.
I did my first astrology reading. I had done a lot of other kinds of readings, but I did my first astrology reading, and we listened to about the first 5 minutes, and I got everything wrong.
Uh-huh.
And we both thought, all right, there's got to be a better way to do this. So from the second reading ever, I checked the Chiron transits out first before I said a word.
Right.
And then I've probably done that 1,000 or more times, easily. 1,000,
And what's
2,000.
your rationale for that? Why do you do that?
Well, because they work.
Yes.
Um, and
I
if
know
you
that,
do,
but
if
tell
you
the
do,
viewers why you would want
so
to look at
um,
that.
because if you look at the Chiron transits, historical transits of Chiron to Chiron, but also Chiron to really anything,
Mhm.
and the Saturn return, and if they're old enough, Uranian opposition, the person will tell you what they need without
Mm,
actually having to say what they need. So it introduces a therapeutic, um, going behind the scrim level, and if the astrologer is sensitive, and very few people do this. I mean, I've assigned this exercise to many students, and not, maybe one of them has come back with it completed.
right, right. It's
Uh,
interesting. I use Chiron in every single consultation. I couldn't imagine doing one without.
no, it is very much about now because of its whole-making quality in this fragmented era. But the transits give a series of life turning points, and you can tell
Mm,
how the person's life has developed up to that time. And by the
mhm,
time you get up to the current moment and find your way to the present, as the Course in Miracles says, you find the present, suddenly it becomes very obvious what to talk about in the
right.
reading.
Hmm.
And you'll hear the person's tale of woe, and they've never given a version of events like that. And they will see the connection between events that did not seem to be connected, because there's always going to be a through theme.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've demonstrated this in live events, with students in the room, and it's
Yeah.
amazing. So I need to, I'll put feelers out to my audience and find out who wants to be like a experimental subject
Yeah, for
for
sure.
YouTube.
That's a great idea. I think it's a case study for people to see how what I would call, and I don't want to put anybody down, but real astrology works
Mhm.
this way, where you were there's a test case and
Yes.
it's demonstrable.
Yeah.
And you can say, yeah, I do this because this works, rather than sort of let me feel the chart, or people will say I'm an intuitive astrologer. It's like, of
Yeah.
course you're intuitive. My dentist should be intuitive. This
Yes.
is what we are like that. It's not because you're intuitive that you're actually getting this information, hopefully. Otherwise, you're just making shit up. And what we're supposed to be doing is seeing what the chart is telling us, and
Yes.
then trying to make sense of that so that the person in front of us or the group of people that are listening can actually use that information. Otherwise, it's just all drivel. And this is, I think, my biggest problem with what's going on now, is that there's just too much of everything all the time. Everything means everything all the time. And it's disconcerting. I get really depressed actually at times, because I just think, wow, it's hard enough being an astrologer because everybody thinks you're bonkers as it is. And then on top of that, when those are the sort of mascots, let's say, or those are the people who are reflecting back to the community what astrology is, it's no wonder people think this is a complete waste of time.
Yeah, yeah, and I did, until I found someone who had a voice, and so when if anybody wants to critique the fact that I'm an astrologer, I just have them read one of my art, or send them to one of my articles to read,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
read a perfectly cohesive, informed analysis of
Yeah.
something. And I say, when I'm speculating, there was a thought I wanted to follow up on. We're talking about Chiron and the use of a case study. So here's the
Mm.
opposite of generalization. Here's
Mhm.
the individual case that people can relate to, but it's still distinct, individual, and in a sense private,
Mm.
and one of a kind. I mean, it's very important that any one person's life story is one of a kind thing, but many people can relate to it. And I think
Mhm.
this is the antithesis to this broadly generalized, predicting a year or something,
Mhm.
generally kind of approach. More scribal. It's more. You have to deal with a unique case in astrology, or you're not doing astrology.
Right, right. Yeah. And can you do you ever work generationally in that way? Because Chiron, and I think you're one of my 60s pals, because I'm from 66. When are you born?
64,
Is
1964.
it? Yeah, so
So I just
you
turned 60 a
probably,
couple of weeks ago, and I
happy
do
birthday.
generational studies.
Yeah.
That I find is legitimate. I think as
Yeah, that's
long as you
very
know what
interesting.
you're saying,
Mm,
and as
mm,
long as you have some sense of history, and you've worked
mhm.
with people from that era.
Yeah.
So for example, like 93, I did a whole series on 1993. I don't know where to find it, but I did
Mm,
a whole series on 1993, the Uranus Neptune conjunction. So this is very important, and it's completely left out of the astrological discussion, uh, typical of Neptune, as if it never happened, but it did.
it
It
just
did happen.
dissolved.
So then, and by the way, the lack of Neptune in this chart, I think, is interesting. That we need to read
Huh.
this chart explaining, what Neptune is doing. Like, essentially, Neptune is the void of course planet. It's square Vesta.
Uh-huh.
Give me a second. And but it's finished the square. It's come out of the square to Vesta. I think there's going to be a big story in the previous 24 hours. Anyway, um, you can, if you are compassionate and honest, you can talk about generational astrology.
Mm, mm,
So, for example, Neptune, Uranus, Neptune in, because you always say the slower, quicker planet first, in Capricorn, talks about the crumbling of society's infrastructure, but it also talks about something happening on the physical plane, Capricorn. Ah, who knew this is going on in 93? I hear about it in like 96 when Dave
Mm,
Arner, the same astrologer who told me that Neptune's rising, Navy did it and we'll never know. He said, we're
mm.
not going to understand the true nature of this astrology for 7 years. I'm not sure why he picked 7 years.
That
Well,
part of the Uranus transit.
Uranus, yeah, it could be that, but it was particularly pertaining to Uranus conjunct Neptune. And then like, what do we have 7 years later? Well, first of all, did the World Trade Center get attacked in 93? I think that was the
Yeah,
first
the first
bomb.
bombing was the 93
And then
bomb.
we
Yeah,
have 9/11 happening in 2001, which is
yeah,
8 years later, but that's close enough to seven.
yeah,
And so you need a broad historical perspective that is itself acquired knowledge that the internet is brutal on
mm,
acquired knowledge. Everyone's an expert. I was
yeah.
jokingly say, I'm an idiot. I have to get used to the fact that everyone's cooler and smarter than me. It's finally happened. I'm the least cool and the least intelligent person. Congratulations, everyone. You all won the game. So it's brutal on
Yeah,
acquired knowledge.
yeah,
You have to like to read, not only read a lot, but you have to like to read to be an astrologer. You have to be analytical. You need to have several dictionaries to
yeah.
tell you what all these words mean. I was once, let's say, hanging out with a youngish astrology student, very beautiful girl, and she was kind of looking to me for some guidance in her studies. She was working with another one of these serious medievalist people, the you're doomed people, and the conservative neocon Republican branch of astrology. And I said, look, to do this, you've got to have a sense of you need to know some classical astrology. You need to know who William Lilly was, know a little bit about Elizabethan astrology, and you need to know about the 19th century revival, and you need to know about the 20th century and Dane Rudyard, and you need to know a little bit about Bailey and Blavatsky and their influence entering partly through, they kind of merge into psychological astrology through Rudyard, who was very influenced by Bailey and Blavatsky, and then the groovy 70s astrology revival, and then Project Hindsight, the 90s, another 93 thing. And she said, you're expecting me to be a PhD in astrology. And I said, no, I'm expecting you to take a good survey course.
Yeah, yeah, and at least have the curiosity.
To probe all of those things, but people want
Yeah,
the power. They want to be able to say, I have the power. Now,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
an
yeah,
astrologer. Well, show me some.
yeah. Yeah, this is it.
Let's see a little
That
bit.
is literally the formula that I saw with yoga, where people went from
Uh-huh.
in the early era, let's say up until sort of the 80s, 90s, people would assume that you would study yoga for years and then maybe one day, possibly,
You would teach.
become a teacher.
Yeah.
And now people are like, hey, this feels really good. I'm going to go to a teacher training
Yoga teacher
course.
trainer training.
Yeah,
Yoga
and you
teacher
get a
trainer
certificate.
training. I have a satire on yoga teacher trainer training. Who's going to train the yoga teacher trainers of tomorrow? It's the lusty wanderer yoga trainer training.
Yeah, it's desperate.
It's
It's
hilarious.
desperate.
It's
It's the
desperate.
same
It's
thing.
desperate. It's
Yeah.
stupid. The philosophical, when you look at Paramahansa Yogananda teaching yoga, he's sitting in the front of the room in front of a group of people wearing suits and dresses at the Self-Realization Fellowship. It was
Yeah,
considered a philosophical art. And for
of
me,
course. Yeah, yeah.
the deep disappointment, I was brought into yoga path through the philosophy. Yes, I learned some hatha yoga from Hindelman,
Yeah,
but I had a deadhead friend who had a teacher
yeah.
named Viraj and a guru named Gurani Anjali, and I was brought for darshan. I had 5 minutes with Gurani Anjali, who nailed me in 5 minutes, not even 30 seconds.
Mhm.
She took one look at me and told me my problem, and she was right.
Yeah,
That it's a spiritual thing, it's a philosophical thing.
yeah.
We did like a 3-year compare and contrast of the Bhagavad Gita with the Course in Miracles.
Oh, interesting. That would be very
It's
interesting to see.
fabulous.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
convinced me that that the most accurate religion is Hinduism. I don't agree
yeah.
with the caste system and all that stuff, which may be a
Mm.
real thing. Who
That
knows?
actually is not part of the original system, but anyway,
Good.
yeah,
I'm happy
yeah,
to hear that. But the
exactly.
cosmology of Hinduism, which is Sanskrit teachings come through,
Yeah,
is a fabulous cosmology for
yeah,
us people wandering around what's up on Earth.
for
And then
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
meeting all these yoga teachers. They all have nice ass. This is the thing. Ooh, I'm a yoga teacher trainer. I'm like, do you know anything? They're all good at hatha yoga exercise,
Yeah,
like weightlifting,
sports. It's sports. Yeah,
sports.
yeah.
And
It's
then
gymnastics. Yeah.
namaste.
Yes. No,
Namaste.
but I see the same exact thing happening in astrology, and I just find it it's socially it's a phenomenal. And I think the one thing that allows me to kind of make sense out of that is understanding the Hindu cosmology, which is that we're in Kali Yuga, and that this is fully expected, and that this is quite normal, so that
Yeah.
it just at least keeps you aware that most of the people that you're going to meet are either frauds or fakes, and they are, you have to dig. If you're sincere, you'll find the right
Mm.
teacher, but
Hmm.
you can't assume that the teacher is good quality right off the bat. And that's, I think, the only thing that's kept me kind of grounded in this last couple of decades, I suppose.
Well, and sadly, the property of the internet to take people out of their own center,
Yes, out of their own body, forget
out of their
it.
body. Out of
Yeah,
body means out of mind. Out of body
yes,
means crazy.
yes,
And when you look at
uh,
the crazy behavior and the choices, this has a lot to do
yeah.
with out of body, out of mind.
Absolutely. And I think also out of social context, out of society, because they're not only not in touch with themselves and their own intuition, but also they're missing the connection that we used to have socially, that where we
Hmm.
had a responsibility towards each other.
Hmm.
And when you just fire off a comment online, you're cut off from that, and you don't have that sense of belonging to this
Hmm.
community, and therefore the responsibility that goes with that. And this is devastating. I think we're seeing that more and more as years go by online.
Even the blog posts and Substacks and the YouTubes, it's not. There's no real responsibility, and there's no gatekeeping. There's a lot of
Mm,
bad astrology books, but they all had editors.
right. Yeah.
And the thing now is that it really looks like nothing goes through an editor, and that very little was written by anyone who ever worked with an editor previously.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah,
That's really
and then a
shifting
bad
around to the
astrology
reality.
book could be left on the shelf as well. It wasn't going to do any harm. If
Yes.
it was, if it wasn't being sold, okay, fine. It's kind of relegated to the corner or the storeroom or something. But if there's crap videos out there,
They're getting
people will
blown up
still
your
watch
nose.
them.
Yes, you
They
cannot
won't
say
they
yes.
won't realize that they're garbage because they're hearing things that they like to hear. There's an astrologer that people keep recommending to me, who I've seen, in fact, over the last 10 or 12 years, and for that extended period of time, and she's got hundreds of thousands of followers, she's been saying every time I've ever seen a video that we're on the verge of waking up, the collective
Oh
consciousness is
God.
awakening right now, in this
Right
moment. This
now. Yeah.
particular astrological configuration is
Yeah.
it. This is the one. Now
Suddenly
we're
we're going to be
waking up.
enlightened.
And it's like,
The
I'm waiting
ascension.
for it.
No,
It's
no, the
like,
ascension happened. We all got lodged in the floating astral plane called the internet. There has
right.
been an ascension. We have all ascended not to 5D, which is not the place to aim for anyway, but sort of like somewhere between the third and the fourth dimension, an astral plane where you can sort of find your way around. It's sort of a dream. We're living in this dream plane. And
It's on that boat that crashed into the bridge.
well,
It's
this
like,
chart is going to
we're all
require
hanging
some
around
very
on that boat.
careful reflection. I think we've got a live one here because of something completely outrageous happened, and they can't blame it on Al Qaeda.
Right.
Will they
Yeah. Or
try?
Putin.
Will they try?
Of
Will they?
course. Yeah.
And
Putin
I
would
don't
have been
know.
at the
It's
command
hard to
there.
it's
Yeah.
hard to look. Flying an airplane into a building that burns up and falls down is dramatic. A bridge falling down in the middle of the night,
People
and
were on it, though. There were many cars that fell into the
I guess
water.
7 people known to be missing.
Oh, I see. Okay. I didn't know, I didn't get the number, but I know there were cars on the
Well,
bridge,
of
and
course there
quite,
were, and they're not. you don't know someone's missing until they don't show back up. So
Yeah,
that toll will continue to rise,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
still not like the flames and the CGI,
yeah, that's sure, yeah.
majesty of the World Trade Center falling down.
Mm. In
Um,
its own footprint,
and
yeah.
it is plausible that you could take a bridge pier out and the building would fall down, whereas it is not plausible that you could hit a skyscraper at the top and then the whole thing falls down not once but twice.
Three times, actually. Three times.
Well, if you
Three times.
count building 7 where an airplane didn't hit it,
Yeah, we're no nothing was crashed into it, but it's
yes,
all good. It's all good.
office fires. So
All fine and good.
this is going to be a fascinating journalistic case study
Right.
to and then of course we have the astrology because it's a time chart. So back
Hmm.
to your very perceptive thoughts about the flattening out of meaning. I think we really have to keep our eyes on the main problem, which is the digital environment.
Hmm.
Need and I people are going on about it a little bit, but I'm very influential in several important philosophical and scientific circuits.
Hmm.
And I have made it plain in um, well-spoken language the problem of the digital environment, and very few people are picking up on it. A couple of
Hmm.
people have picked up on it. Um, the more scribal types have picked up on it, but it's not a discussion that's happening. And in the mainstream, it's almost like there's a taboo against critiquing the digital environment in the digital environment. But
Well,
what I mean by
we're in a double bind as well. That's for exactly that reason, because we're now stuck. I mean, that's how I'm earning my living now, online. So it's literally a
yeah,
double
but they're not
bind.
going to strike you dead for commenting on it. I mean, and Google, Google
Oh, I
only
see what you
cares when
mean.
I
No,
talk
no,
about
no, of course
RNA.
not.
When I
No,
start
no,
talking
but
about
I'm just thinking,
RNA,
what is
then
the
Google
alternative?
bans me. But this is the most important spiritual issue of our day: is
Right.
what digital consciousness has done to us.
Hmm.
Because the thought I departed from you on accidentally was when you said about finding the teacher, and you will, if you sincere, you'll find the teacher, but it's harder if you're taken out of yourself and you don't
Hmm.
have that interior orientation to be able to know the truth
Yeah.
from your own subjective viewpoint.
Exactly. And we haven't been taught. There is a very, I wrote a book after I left yoga, when I realized I was kind of retiring from it. I wrote a book, and one of the chapters was about how to spot a good teacher. And because there is actually a text in yoga, an ancient text, which describes what a good teacher looks like. And it's not a good looking person, it's not a hard body, and it's not great leggings. It's got a lot to do with their behavior. And when you understand these principles, and then of course through my own experience I just added my own vision of that, but the principles are there, they're set down centuries ago, that there is a way of finding out what is a legitimate teacher and what is not.
I would love to
And
see that chapter. Have you
yeah, I'll
reprinted it
send it to you.
as a web person? I would. This is a fabulous subject.
Yeah, it really is. And it's important, it's vital, because the problem is that people are lost and we're not
Mhm.
taught actual discernment. We're not taught how to understand what is good and bad in terms of, quality. People accept things at face value and it's just phenomenal.
Mhm.
And this is the problem, because people are not actually, they're not even aware that there is something that they should be looking for. They
Yep.
just get a sense that there's some resonance
Yep.
that they should be feeling. And that's actually the worst possible thing, because that's usually when you're being manipulated,
Yes.
when you're feeling some kind of resonance.
Yeah,
So,
that's lowbrow.
yeah,
That's very astral.
yeah.
And look, at the flat Earth phenomenon is a fascinating study. Are you aware of how popular the flat Earth is now?
Alas, yes, it's phenomenal actually, because I follow a couple of science forums, for astronomy type forums, and there are always flat earthers there. It just boggles the mind. And even in my every now and then, but very rarely I have to say, but every now and then I'll get a comment in my comments under a video saying, certain phenomena are not possible because of the flat earth, or this is, this is because of the flat earth. And it's just like, whoa,
Yeah.
really? So of all the entire cosmos, only the earth is flat.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Jupiter. I mean, but nobody's, has any flat earther ever looked through a telescope at Jupiter? I mean,
They don't actually see. This is part of the thing again. It's about not wanting to challenge your own assumption. And this is where the internet has been so toxic, because people get an idea, they get hooked on the idea, and then they refuse to examine that idea critically. And this in the old days, back in the day,
of a
we
book
would
back
we
when there
would
was
be
a book.
challenged in the educational system. We'd be challenged to stand up for our viewpoint, and it would be promoted. The interchange of ideas and the pushback was actually expected. You otherwise, how could you know that your position was valid? And now, in the last, I think, 30 years, it's all been about gold stars and participation, and you're doing great, and it's all fine. You did your best. Don't worry. And it's like, no, that's not good enough, because that means that there's this kind of fragility that's built in to the mind, where people no longer feel comfortable if they're challenged on the facts, and then you end up with this ad hominem attack. And that I get quite often. If I push back on something that somebody says, they won't come back with the argument. They will never come back and address the issue. They'll
Yeah.
only say something personal. And then I don't engage, and I deliberately don't engage, because I realize that it's a pointless exercise, because you can
Mhm.
people posit their comment by the way that they actually write it out, that they're waiting to catch the flaw, or they're waiting for a trap. They're going to catch you out somehow, and tell you how you're wrong. And that's not a discussion for me. It's a time waster, so I just don't go there. And I do see this a lot with astrology as well. It's that if you say something, even negative, so-called negative, but really just describing what the astrology is saying, that's not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be easy. You're so negative.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, well, you know what? Life is hard, actually. It turns out that this is not an easy gig. So yeah, but there's so much fragility, psychological fragility out there, and it's a bit of a minefield. So
Well, I mean, and even tenured professors of law get in trouble for making perfectly rational statements
yes,
because they're
yeah,
construed to be misogynist or transphobic or
yeah, yeah,
or whatever. And so this all is digital. This is all the extreme polarization of digital. You
yeah,
know you're on the astral plane because everything is extremely polarized. That's the first
right.
clue you have that you're on the astral plane. Is
And
it's one,
cloistered as well. Just close. You get into that bubble,
yeah,
and so your bubble is your bubble, and everything outside of that must be wrong, because this feels good to me.
yeah.
That's very, very, very dangerous. It's especially dangerous because, like, when you hear how people react to global news, because I studied international relations, and that's what I did. That was one of the reasons I went to Brussels. I was working at NATO, and I was working at the European Commission. That was my job,
So
and
we didn't know each other in Brussels. We just happened to both be there.
we were just there overlapping, but we
I
didn't
was there.
meet,
I
I
left. I
think.
was there basically oh 05, oh 06, oh 07.
Yeah, I was there, but I wasn't. So in 05, 06, 07. So I was a mother at that point. So I was full into mothering and teaching yoga at that point. And in fact, in 05, I had a baby who died, and so there was a lot of things that changed quite dramatically for me in that period of time. So my two younger ones were small. There was a lot of focus on me in that period of time. So we were overlapping for sure. But I've
Mhm.
been there for 33 years, and the reason I went there was to work in the institutions. And then when I see comments online about certain things that are happening, especially with around the context of Ukraine and things that are to do with NATO, I do actually have a context I can refer to. I was in the room. I did actually work on these things. I
Mhm.
worked on these projects. I traveled to these countries, and people are just not having it. That's not part of the. It's not what the New York Times tells them. So
Mhm. I
it's
want to
it's
show you
it's
something.
painful. It's really painful.
This is my first temporary press credential to the Parlement.
Right.
And I
That's for the
attended
commission. Yeah.
the date's not on it, sadly.
Yeah.
But it's a visitor pass before my
Yes.
official credential was ready. And it
Yes.
was a flu briefing.
Oh, from the bird flu,
They were
H1N1.
priming, they were
Big
priming the,
drama. I
the press
know.
corps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I could tell that was an interesting event. But now I know what it is. Now that I've done
Now
several
you see
tours
this
of
the whole
duty,
spectrum. Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
they were priming the journalists
for
to be
sure.
helpless.
Yeah.
They were priming the
But the
journalists,
public too. You were priming all of us.
but there was no story out of it. That's the problem. There was no lead. We all sat there for an hour and a half while all these flu experts gave us a lecture, and there was no lead. I'm thinking like
You-
Flo Higgins. You come back from the meeting. What's the lead? Like,
Yeah.
what's the most important thing that happened you can quote in the first paragraph? What's the lead?
Mm.
She would always be like, what's the lead? So, well, it turns out that's actually the best question. That is Flo Higgins. Right again. Um, there was no lead. It was a meeting without a
Yeah.
lead. Nothing
But
happened.
that pretty much describes the European Commission right there. I think that sums it up beautifully, actually. Except that now you have multitudes more countries that belong to it, and there are like loads and loads of things going on with no lead. So yeah,
We're always
it's a
trotting interesting people out for press conferences. We shouldn't miss the point of this conversation, though.
right.
I think our best takeaway here is that astrology is getting flattened out and corrupted under digital conditions.
Yeah.
That is best to really understand who your teacher is and why you should be paying attention to them. We agree that the teacher's behavior is the most important thing because all people really get is your teaching example.
Yeah, and also how people behave and the things that they do, the way that they act in small ways
Mm-hmm.
is how everything is. It's the
Yes.
way it all is. It
Yes.
leads from one thing to another. That's the whole framework right there. And yeah, so this is where it's easy in a micro video, let's say, I don't know, a minute long or something on YouTube or TikTok or whatever.
Be
It's
convincing.
easy to look really good and say something really interesting in a
Mm-hmm.
flashy way. And you can come across as something very substantial if you don't then spend more time to flesh it out, because once you then have to flesh it out, then it falls apart really quickly. And again, I hate to harp on this metaphor, but it's exactly the same with yoga. You
Mm-hmm.
get people who are trained to teach the body to put itself in a particular position, often according to music. So the soundtrack becomes more important than actual yoga. And this is modern yoga I'm talking about. And that when somebody actually has an issue or there's something that requires some kind of adjustment out of the norm, which is most of the time, that everything falls apart. It's not part of the model. And so this is really, it's a problem in modern thinking, I think, that astrology is just happening to be having a moment. And or maybe I'm just in it, so I'm noticing. But it's amplified by the also the drive to money, because people, I certainly didn't become an astrologer to make money. I had no idea that I could actually make a living out of this. In fact, it was only because Uranus crossed my daimon, which is conjunct my Mercury at 29 Pisces. And at that point, I had this moment where it was like, I could actually be an astrologer. Like, I'm doing this for my friends anyway. I'm doing this for people. And that something switched in my head and I got the idea I could do it, that I could be an astrologer. And at that point, I something allowed me to be that thing. But it was up until that point, it was just that's what other people do. It's just a hobby. It's something I could never make a living from that. And then something changes, but it was never for the money that I would do
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because YouTube very quickly monetizes, people are just throwing garbage, including AI garbage, out and making videos about absolutely nothing. And in fact, making 3 videos about the same theme. I'm seeing every day or so, I'm seeing the same people pushing the same subject that they just did a video on the week before, because it monetizes. And so this is what's driving the whole thing. It's this need for growth. It's a need for monetization. And
Hmm.
that, again, is part of the toxicity of our modern situation, So
Yeah.
what can we do about that? It's a never-ending story. But that's what it is. That is, for my way of seeing it, is that the slow and steady wins the race, but it gets you marginalized. And that's, I chose not to be monetized. I didn't want to be monetized because I didn't want to earn from Google. And as a result, I make my living from my clients,
Hmm.
basically. And as a result, also Google is less interested in pushing me to the front. So if people don't
Oh, if you
interact with my
monetize your channel, you get more
you get
content.
much more views, because in fact I had been monetized. I was monetized for a year, and I left it in December. And in that period of time, with fewer subscribers, I had more views on my videos. Now I have more subscribers and fewer views on my videos. So it's pretty obvious what's going on. And I'm not the only one to say that. It's just that the money is what pushes the algorithm to make you grow faster. So it's a self-fulfilling thing, it's
Hmm.
like the more junk you spew out, the more you will be seen, and the more people will relate to that as the topic or as the authority. And the more viewership you get, people will say they must be good because everybody's watching. Just like, shoot me now. So yeah, there you are. But that's kind of like your non-event briefings in the European Commission. It's just like, well, this must be important. It's at the European Commission. It's like, yeah, try and work there for a
I
few
would go
years.
for fun. That was the part that I liked, is I had it purely for hobby value. I was
Right,
qualified to get the press card because I was in the National Writers Union, NUJ,
right.
NUJ of the UK. I
Uh,
wasn't a trade journalist. I had other press credentials, and they gave me a press card, good top level. I could be this close to the president of the European Commission,
yeah, yeah,
and so I would go purely for fun. I would go purely. I would put a suit on and take a taxi over and take pictures,
yeah.
and hang out in the cafeteria, write a horoscope every now and then, and it was just. I do a lot of things as a journalist because I can do them,
Hmm.
and then I've got an interesting story to tell, and that's what journalism is.
Yes, yeah. And
So
hopefully
I
the
guess I
people do.
continue to practice journalism, astrology as journalism, right?
Mm.
I've focused it through the journalistic form, which is concise, and it is also. I just gave a journalism 101 lecture on my website, Planet Waves FM, last week. It's fun if you're curious about journalism. It's a most recent program, planetwaves.fm Top Show. I did almost 2 hours on what isn't journalism. And one thing that journalism is it must be written for people who've never touched the subject before.
Right. Something
Every
that can be
article must be a
understandable.
self-contained unit
Right.
with its own background, telling you who people are. It's not written for the erudite. And so when you
Hmm.
put astrology through that prism, you get a good result because it must be edited carefully. There cannot be fancy words that nobody
Hmm.
understands, and you have to attribute your sources.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a good thing for me to keep in mind, because I have a hard time with that when I'm presenting astrology. I There's a lot of what I want to say, and then I forget to give the background. I forget to tell
mhm,
people the details of why they need to know this or why this matters. And so it's
mhm.
very easy because there's so many aspects to describe, which is why I don't like doing these videos, actually, because there's so much to say
But
and
you
they
pick
can go
one
on
thing
and
and
on.
you have fun. The thing is, you pick one thing and you have fun.
Yeah.
The example is so important. I think that it's not just about the details of your life, but also that you're willing to take the time to explain something, whatever it might be.
Hmm. Hmm.
That you can respond to a question spontaneously, whatever the
Yeah.
question might be.
This I miss, is the interaction with people. Occasionally, I've done lives with a friend of mine who's she's a seer, she's a mystic and a medium, and we work together. But I like the interaction, but it's
Mhm.
not super fast paced because it's always the chat box, So you have to kind of take a minute, read the
Well, the
question, come back.
interaction's supposed to be you go to Isabel Hickey's house every Thursday night
Right.
and sit there and she makes you tea. which
and hang
actually is
out.
true. And I know somebody who went to some of those. Rob Norris, the bass player for the Bongos, was the
Okay.
who actually did Lou Reed's chart with Lou. In fact, when Lou Reed died, Rob Norris gave me an essay that Lou Reed wrote in analyzing his own astrology.
Oh,
So for
interesting.
the first
Wow.
time in one of my astrological obits, I had someone who knew the person, who got writing from the person, and
Yeah.
Rob Norris would go to Isabel Hickey's get-togethers
Mm.
when we would open our homes. I would open my home if anybody was even meekly interested. If I heard from anybody in my community, I would be happy to meet in a cafe or
Hmm.
come hang out in my living room, and we'll talk astrology at all hours of the
Hmm.
night.
Yeah.
Um, but this now is considered like dangerous, special, risque, or impossible because I don't even know what city you're in. What country are you in right now?
I'm in Spain at the moment.
Okay, so there
I'm in
you.
Spain because the weather's nicer here than in Belgium.
That's easy.
Um,
It's a
yes,
little rough
exactly.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm in Spain until May. Mm.
Yeah, but I did love living in Belgium. It was I thought a very
Yeah,
exciting place and weird. You know, the national ID cards printed in 4 languages,
yeah,
so they couldn't
yeah.
have an attitude. I found great models working in Brussels. I love my weird little neighborhood, Saint-Gilles.
Yes, yes. And she's very
And
artsy. Yeah.
it was completely the opposite of Paris, which had like, we are very important.
Yes, yes, yeah. No,
Everyone is like,
it's the scruffy cousin. It's Paris's scruffy cousin. Yeah,
scruffy. That's what I love the
yeah,
most about it. And
yeah.
the motorcades, the NATO motorcades, sirens wailing through the streets at all hours of the day
Endless.
and night,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
adds a little bit to it. You're like, who's in the motorcade? Oh,
yeah.
it's the president of Nalbovia who
Yeah,
survived the Holocaust.
whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, when you live there for a while, it's just like, oh, get out of the way. Yeah, the Belgians can't stand it. But yeah, I love Brussels. I had a wonderful time there, but I'm still technically living there, but I just need to move on. It's my kids have moved on, and now I'm moving on too.
Right.
Um, so yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it at this. It
Yes,
was so nice catching up with you. It was really
absolutely.
interesting to hear your point of view. I'm looking forward to reading your article on the bridge because I know that that will be
Oh, it's
extremely
just an
enlightening.
audio. I didn't have
Oh,
time for it.
you're
Yeah, I
okay. Yeah.
jammed it out in 45 minutes this morning.
Okay, good.
This
Okay, I'll
took the
have a
longest
listen
to,
then.
read the chart, which I do
Yeah,
by
that's the time-consuming
making it
bit.
my
Yeah.
own. And by the way, if
Yeah.
you're studying astrology, get the chart off the computer screen. Get the
Yes,
chart
put
into
it in
physical
paper. Yeah.
form where you
Yeah.
have rulers and
Yeah,
pencils.
yeah, yeah.
My drawer looks
And
like,
draw the aspects in. I
yeah,
agree
let me
with
take
that.
this
Yeah.
drawer out. I mean, this is the drawer of all the things that I
Right.
use to mark my charts up, okay? It includes paper clips,
Yeah.
rulers, whiteout,
Yeah. Well, I
these
mean, to be
things for
fair,
in
I
my.
think the younger generation, I think the younger generation actually thinks differently to us. I think it depends a lot how you were educated early in life. So I see how my kids operate. My kids are in their early 20s. My daughter's just 25 now. My son is 22. And
Sorry
they
about this.
do think differently. They
I can't
think
get the drawer
differently.
back. But the
So
physical plane, astrology is a physical thing about physical bodies and human beings and human interaction.
yeah.
Is that a cat?
My dog has just come through the door,
Please,
busting down the door.
let
She
me see
knows it's
him.
time now.
What's his
So
name?
this is Meta. It's a her. She's come puppy.
Come here,
Come.
Ms. Meta.
Yeah.
Ah,
No, 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 come. Come, puppy.
okay. No, that's all right.
Great. I'm scared her off now. So she doesn't know why I'm picking her up.
Camera
Um,
shot.
Yeah, so she has a kind of biological clock in her that knows, and she also hears when I'm wrapping things up. As soon as I'm wrapping up with a client,
Show
that's there. She
she
knows
comes in
she's right there. It's like,
and
oh, break
ends the
time.
session for you. It used to be the
Yeah,
cassette running out of tape. That was
yeah,
the boundary
exactly.
of the session. You could say, well, we're out of tape. Thank you very much.
Right.
90 minutes. That was quite enough of a conversation. We've
Yeah,
we've
yeah,
covered all the material and we've been talking for more than 90 minutes. Listen, thank you
yeah.
very much.
It's been really fun,
I
really good.
appreciate
Yeah,
your whole milieu, all that you bring to astrology on day one.
thank
Forget
you.
about
Thank
the next 20, whatever years. Day one is when you brought something valuable to astrology with your I think accurate, useful yoga background, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this was actually, I'll maybe have to leave it on this one, but this was one of the most shocking things for me because I actually came to astrology through the lens of spirituality. So
Hmm.
through the lens of philosophy and yoga and so
Yep.
on. And then I enter into this world where people are not nice and super competitive and like
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
wound up.
Yeah.
And it took me a couple of years to realize I was not in the same place.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that was quite an eye opener. And then you realize that not everybody's coming at this subject with the same, because I also am very attached to India and Indian teachers. I've been going to India for 28 years. And when you're a Jyotisha, you have to have a spiritual practice. It's just like not even negotiable. Your spiritual practice is what grounds you. You establish this connection to service and to the divine, and then you do your reading. Then you
Hmm.
do your, and if you don't have that, then you're considered a fraud, which in
Mm.
India they are a dime a dozen, but or a rupee a dozen, I guess. But for me, that was always just a given. It was just like, of course, that's how you do it. This is like I'm taking on karma by talking to this person, by doing something with their chart. So it had bloody well better be positive, or I'm creating some real
Taking
havoc here.
on karma. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's a huge consideration, and I think we're missing that in the West. We're missing this idea, and certainly we're missing it on YouTube. We are.
Except for here.
Except for here and now. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, on that note, thanks a million. I really
Yes.
appreciate this conversation.
Yes.
And I look forward to chatting with you again. Next crisis, maybe we'll find something new
Anytime, or a teaching
to.
opportunity, a teaching opportunity, even where yoga meets astrology.
Yeah.
I've heard at least 20 ideas in what you've been saying. So I will stay in touch.
Fantastic.
I'll add you to my lists, and
Fantastic.
I'll give you a backstage pass so you can read everything
Fantastic.
on Planet
Yeah.
Waves.
And I
And
will send you that passage also about what is a good teacher
absolutely
according to
looking
the
forward to that.
tradition. Yeah.
Yes, and I get the
Okay.
idea now that you've summed it up in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very good. All
Good.
right, Eric. Thanks a
Susan,
million.
love.
Bye bye.
Bye for now.